Okay, I'll just start it. I need to record it. You can watch it later if you're interested. Oh, first things first. My friend here Yuri, who is in chat, reminded me of something important. I'm streaming here from Brazil, and there's something I need to point out. When I talk about libertarians, I'm not talking about the. I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about them on the broader sense that you have in the U.S. or some of the Anglosphere, I guess. Uh, here, when we talk about libertarians, we're talking about a more strict segment, political segment. We're talking basically about anarchists. I mean, hardcore libertarians or anarcho-capitalists. If you're talking in the Austrian sense, right? The Austro-libertarian branch of libertarianism. I know that in the U.S., the term libertarian uh, uh, term libertarian represents a broader a broader scope of political positions from constitutionalists to anarchists, right? Going through minarchists and whatever. But just to make things more clear, every time I talk about libertarians, I'll be talking about this broader spectrum. And when I want to be specific about anarchists, about AnCaps, I'll just say AnCaps. So that's that's something I needed to tell at the beginning just to avoid confusion, because I'm used to the to talking about libertarians here to refer to AnCaps, but that's not the case on the US, the audience I'm trying to reach. So okay, we have a lot to unpack tonight. Um, there has been a lot of controversy lately regarding this topic. I'll, some weeks ago, I watched this video, this debate between Nicholas J Fuentes, and Dave Smith on Dave Smith's podcast, and I was thinking about it. I was already thinking about a live to address that topic, but some recent events motivated me even more. Namely, all the controversy regarding Charlie Kirk. Right? I don't know the details, but apparently Charlie Kirk, who is at the forefront of TP USA, Turning Point USA, a so-called conservative movement, was advocating for open borders, right? So that made a lot of people upset, and many conservatives on the so-called, not even more so, not more so-called outright. Now it's the dissident right or something like it. But many traditional conservatives were accusing him of being an undercover libertarian, right? A Because they believe libertarians are some sort of libertines and they advocate for open borders and pot and whatever. So there was a lot of heat. Many not mainstream, non mainstream conservatives were going after those those so-called libertarians or conservatarians. I don't know, namely namely Jack Pozobiec. I don't know that if that's the pronunciation, and even the Gab developer Andrew Torba, he made a series of posts which were really weird and made a lot of people upset. Let me show you them. No, it wasn't on Gab, it was on Twitter. Andrew Torba using Twitter. Let's see here. Okay, some UFC gifs. It was nice. Yesterday was a great event. A bit of an anticlimax at the end, but overall a really nice event. Okay, Gab, I don't know. Here, no, Gab Trends, no Gab Trends. Oh, that's it. Where's that post of him? He said a lot of bullshit. I can't find it. see here. Here. Can you see it? Let me see. Okay. I was talking about the supposed opposition between Christianity and libertarianism, or conservatism and libertarianism. Just saying that libertarians will be responsible for kids being exposed to drag queens and overdoses and mass migration. And here is a clear reference to Turning Point USA and the things said by Charlie Kirk. And let me say that I do not follow Charlie Kirk. I heard one interview with him. I didn't like the guy. He sounded too cheerful about things, right? Yeah, the culture wars. Let's talk about entrepreneurship and whatever, without addressing some real issues, right? I tend to don't like cheerful and too optimistic people. There's a lot of weird things going on. There's a lot of tough, hard things going on. You have to pretend with some prudence, right? Some carefulness. You can't be so. Every time you're so optimistic, you end up fooling people. I think. Okay, so he made this post, and there was a lot of backlash. Here you have Keith Knight. Keith Knight has a great channel. He's on BitChute as well. Just cheating on him. There's a lot of good response and some boomer memes. Here I posted a lot of videos. I'll put that on description. There's a lot of good material to address this issue of the relationship between conservatism and libertarianism. But the thing is, we're not talking about proper definitions, right? We're talking about what people perceive as libertarianism and conservatism. Jack Posobiec said something as well, but I don't think I would be able to find it. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, my point is that's not the original post, but he was talking about something like it. Yeah, he's mentioning Russell Kirk, and he's being answered by Michael Malice. If you don't know him, Michael Malice has a great podcast as well, and he talks about the 10 conservative principles, right, by Russell Kirk, who was a conservative philosopher and thinker. And the thing is, the 10 principles, the so-called principles, are not really principles, right? Like saying here, they are so vague that even leftists, even socialists can agree with them. So you're not solving anything. You're just bringing more confusion. But there was a lot of controversy. There was a lot of those takes by preeminent new right figures, by paleo-conservative figures, and there was a lot of heat going on. Exagod, which is the BitChute app developer, he made a response to Vincent from the Red Elephants, who I do not listen at all, but he made a nice podcast in response. He was on fire. He was going after the guy. I just listened to it, and it was really nice. So, well, going back to our previous. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I thought my PC would be hanging. It was hanging. Sometimes that happened. I was scared. Okay, there's someone new here. Let me see. Okay, 3 people. Say something, please. Okay. I'm clicking the wrong button. Okay, back to the start. I was hearing that debate the other day, and it really caught my attention. because I've been following Dave Smith for some time. I really like his podcast. I really like his takes. Yeah, he was in some debates with other libertarians in the broader sense, right? As I was saying, but he is an AnCap, and he was just ripping apart some guys. He debated Nick Sarwark from the Libertarian Party, and he debated Nick Gillespie from the Reason magazine, who is a minarchist. And man, he pointed out his inconsistencies. It was great. I'm in the position that anarcho-capitalism, anarchism, as you want, you can be an anarchist and live in a commune if you want. If it's voluntarism, full voluntarism is the only consistent form of libertarianism, right? Because you can't take a violator of private property like the state to ensure property rights, right? It's a contradiction. So okay, let's go to this debate between them, and I'll pause at some times and make some comments. And just before that, let me say that I also don't follow much of Nick Fuentes' work. I listened to his interview to Stefan Molyneux some 1 or 2 years ago, and heard some new things about them recently, but it's mostly controversy, right? Was mostly some polemic things, right? He has some hard things to say about women. I don't agree that much with him, and I mean, it's kind of an edgy guy, right? Edgy Pelican. I don't know. He's really young, as far as I know, and a lot of people regard him as some sort of genius, right? Some prodigy. I, to be honest, I'm not to this point. I'm not surprised with what he has to say, but let's comment on that, right? I'm not. I don't want to poison the well. At least not much, not that much. Let's see. Tell me if you can hear it properly. Tell me if it sounds good. Please.
How would you describe your politics, your views?
I would describe myself as a paleo-conservative. I know that you are a libertarian. I used to be a libertarian for a long time in high school and college, but then I really started to see the demographics and things like order.
Okay. So let me just say something first. That's a particular trend, mainly regarding this broad spectrum of libertarians that I see on the US. There are many guys who use it to be libertarians in this broader sense, and something was wrong to them, right? It sounded like a sloppy thing. Sounded like, I think, they didn't answer all questions, and many after the 2016 elections started moving from it, right? Because there were some more pressing matters to answer. And to be fair, when you look at things like the Libertarian Party, they doesn't seem like many of them doesn't seem like reasonable guys, right? Many of them sound like weirdos, and I can understand many people being frustrated about it after the Ron Paul era, and just moving, right? Because the libertarianism in the Libertarian Party was corrupted, was co-opted to other interests, and I can understand, but I can also say that they were not moving from hardcore libertarianism, from the consistent libertarianism, which is voluntarism, which is AnCap. Maybe they didn't even knew that, but it would be nice if instead of moving to a more statist solution, they would move to a more purist form of libertarianism, which didn't happen in many cases, but I hope it changed. Okay, let's proceed.
Order are a lot more important than political liberty or the size of government. So I started to read Samuel Francis, people like Paul Gottfried, among others, Patrick Buchanan. And so now I basically describe myself as a paleo-conservative.
Okay, interesting. I like that term. I don't hear a lot of young people using the term paleo-conservative. I'm happy that's making a comeback, and that's interesting because I consider myself to be pretty much a Rothbardian, And Murray Rothbard and the paleoconservatives really forged an alliance. And I've always thought of people like Pat Buchanan and Paul Gottfried as kind of fellow travelers, maybe not AnCap libertarians like myself, but in many ways, people who were concerned with smashing the current order. One of their big goals was to dismantle the managerial state, which I don't.
Okay, so maybe you know that better than me, but when they're talking about paleo-conservatives, the paleo prefix was an opposition at the 90s, as far as I know, to that new branch of conservatism, right? Those Democrats who were going to the Republican Party and started this new conservative movement. I think an important name is William Buckley, right? Bill Buckley, which ceded a lot of ground to the libertarian or to the Democrat agenda at the time, and allowed the neoconservatives to gain prominence in the Republican Party, to gain some hegemony in the Republican Party, and they are sorry, and they are characterized by this more aggressive interventionism, mainly on foreign policy, right? Neocons are pretty much known from wars, from promoting wars in the Middle East or other places, for some weird reasons, some hidden reasons, and that made the traditional conservatives to fade away, and they have some sort of resurgence, I guess, in the 90s with names like they said, with Paul Gottfried and Patrick Buchanan, and at that time the Rothbardian branch of libertarians, the original one, the paleo-libertarian branch of libertarianism, full anarchists, started to get close to them, right? Because there was a lot of problems with the state of the libertarian movement at that time. Rothbard and Lew Rockwell talk about the nihilo. How do you pronounce that? They were nihilistic, right? The nihilistic libertarians who, with all this live and let live stance on all things, and they started a rebirth of the libertarian movement, of a branch of the libertarian movement, with a stronger focus on culture and things that the paleocons were talking about, right? And you can say that the paleo-conservative movement is where you find the initial germing, right? The start of the so-called new right or the alt-right, as you want to call them. Okay, let's go.
I'd imagine we both agree with that. I would take it you're also probably opposed to the warfare state, which is pretty much my biggest issue.
Yes, absolutely. We are on my show. I'm very non-interventionist.
Yeah, very good. Isolationist, sir. Just like was it Lindsey Graham said the other day, the Obama libertarian foreign policy. We've already seen what non-intervention gets you. Did you see Trump tweeted today? He went on a whole Twitter tangent about how crazy all the wars in the Middle East are, and we've killed all these people and spent all this money. And it's quite entertaining to watch left-wing people who hate Donald Trump trying to have a problem with that. And they're like, well, he's just doing
I
this.
did see that.
He just wants to line his own pockets.
Yeah. Well, it's just so funny because like 20 years ago, these were all the anti-war people, and all the same arguments that they made about what George W. Bush was doing in Iraq and with regime change and the war on terror. They've completely done a 180, and I think nobody seems to notice that.
Yeah, and to be fair, there's also a 180 on the other side.
And that's that's somehow the way politics work, right? You're always changing your stance according to your interests, because there's nothing that makes people good and selfless as they enter the public buildings, as they enter the government buildings. They will always follow their own interests, and that those kinds of things happen. It doesn't matter what you promise during campaign. Doesn't matter what were your previous stances, your learning experience or whatever.
Where now all of a sudden, like, Sean Hannity is this great skeptic of the FBI and the CIA. And the funniest thing I've heard in cable news over the last few years was when the Peter Strzok text messages about how they were trying to bring Donald Trump down came out, and Sean Hannity said on his show, he goes, "For the first time in American history, the FBI has become politicized." And you're like, yes,
yeah,
Sean,
that's pretty rich.
it's been nothing but just,
What innocence.
good Christians trying to bring a better world about until 5 minutes ago. That's exactly when the FBI got corrupted. So for people who don't know, that paleoconservatives, I think, much like Murray Rothbard, kind of their origins were really with the old right, the pre-World War II right, the kind of Robert Taft Republicans who were basically for limited government, free market capitalism. They wanted strict immigration controls, and they didn't want any part of this global governance nonsense. I mean, Robert Taft didn't want to be in NATO, hated the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations.
Okay, I didn't remember that, but as Dave's saying, the origins of the paleoconservative movement goes way farther in the past, not just the 90s. But the 90s marked the times of the alliance, I can say, or the coalition between the paleo-libertarians, the Rothbardians, and the paleocon. So, okay.
And so I'd imagine that you kind of have those type of roots.
Exactly right.
So I'm curious, what I'm not trying to, psychoanalyze you or anything, but I'm curious, like, as a young person today, what made you a paleoconservative? Because that doesn't seem like the easiest route for a young guy today. It'd be much easier to be, like a I don't know, either a lefty, a socialist, or if you're going to be on the Republican side, you'd be like a Steven Crowder type kind of what's that? Young Americans for Liberty or something like that. So where did you become what led you to this?
That's a pretty good question. Yeah. I've never really been a leftist. A lot of people have always asked me, have you ever been a communist or a leftist? Because you hear a lot of stories about people that might originate as radical leftists or communists when they're young, and gradually over time, when they mature, they become more conservative. It's that expression about if you're not a liberal when you're...
Okay, sorry. My bad.
You're 20, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative when you're 40, you don't have a brain, whatever. But I was never really a leftist. I think I always saw that this egalitarian tolerance type stuff was basically flawed. And so, like I told you, I started out as a libertarian. I really got into politics actually by watching an interview on Uncommon Knowledge with Thomas Sowell. I don't know, you must be familiar with this. When I was in 8th grade, I watched Uncommon Knowledge, and Thomas Sowell was on there discussing how the economy has the ability to heal itself and talking about spontaneous order and things like this. And I started going to YouTube and I saw Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman and Walter Williams and these kinds of people. And so I was very much like a conservatarian for a long time. But really during the election, I do believe it was the campaign of...
Okay, just to point that out, these guys are great in their own regard. Like Thomas Sowell, I love the guy. Walter Williams as well. He has that documentary. What's called Good Intentions, which was a great one. Milton Friedman has a lot of was a good, how can I say, he spread the word pretty well. He was a really eloquent guy. So I'm not blaming those guys, but they represent what I'm talking about when I say about when I talk about consistent. They represent that part of the libertarian branch, which was all for the free market and and liberty and the spontaneous order, like Hayek as well, like Friedrich Hayek, but they always ceded some ground to government. They always allowed that seed of government in the hopes that it would remain small, which was the entire project of the founding fathers, as far as I know, but it didn't work. It didn't work well, right? And people keep pressing the same button. People keep talking about this minarchism solution. When you have a small regulatory government, a small security government, and you let any other thing to be performed by the market, to be handled by the market, the interactions, the market interactions. The market is not a thing, but is the abstraction of all those interactions between people, among people. But they always left this small seed of destruction, right? And many people get frustrated by it because it is inconsistent. It is inconsistent. If you're valuing freedom, how can you allow the state to exist? And value private property, you think private property is a right, how can you violate this through the state? How can you allow it to happen? And this kind of inconsistency, in my opinion, leads to a lot of distortions that make people frustrated with libertarianism, and then they go to other solutions, like was the case of Nick pointed here. Okay, so let's see what happened to
of Donald Trump that started to show me maybe the areas where libertarianism fell short of the mark a little bit. I think a lot of people have talked about how Donald Trump is maybe the fulfillment of what Sam Francis was talking about in the 1990s. I've recently been reading a lot of his essays in this book called Revolution from the Middle. And really, the resemblance is uncanny between what they were saying back in the 1980s and 1990s, what Donald Trump was saying in 2016 about demographics, about political globalism, and he doesn't articulate it in the best political vocabulary, but in intuitive and instinctive ways, articulating a lot of the same things.
Okay, so remember that. Remember what Nick's saying here. He's talking about Donald Trump, which was like Donald Trump with some kind of, with some, like he was a fulfillment of a promise, of a movement, the materialization of something that was going on since the 80s, some form of revolution. And you can get that impression from the times of the 2016 election, right? Trump was saying a lot of important things. He was talking about interventionism. He was talking about bringing the troops back. He was talking about like the Clintons and Obama made ISIS, and they stabilized a lot of governments in the Middle East. He was talking about the Fed. He was talking about what the Fed does. He was talking about WikiLeaks, and as you may know, all that just didn't go the way he was saying he was going to deal with it, right? The troops are not home yet, most of them. The Fed is still there, and he's pressing Jerome Powell to print more money. He doesn't talk about WikiLeaks at all. He say he doesn't know WikiLeaks. He's not doing anything about Julian Assange. So where did that revolution go, right? And why keep believing it? But let's proceed.
And so gradually, hearing from Donald Trump and hearing from a lot of these alt-right figures during the election, I think it really sort of made me less of a libertarian and brought me more towards, like you said, that more pre-war conservative, Mr. Republican, Robert Taft sort of perspective. So it was a long journey, but it took me a long time to get here. And now I would say paleoconservative is the best fit. I think, and I think for Zoomers, for Generation Z in particular, it's probably the best answer for what we're seeing in the world.
Well, what was it particularly about libertarianism that you thought fell short of the, to address the current problems?
So to me, I think what it was primarily was demographic change. I like the one that changed my life as I saw this meme in 2016 where it showed if only white people voted versus if only black people or people of color voted, if only women voted, and so on. And I saw clearly there was a direct link between so-called identity politics, between these characteristics and how people vote. And I think that says a lot about agency, about rationalism in politics. people making choices, equality, things like that. And then another big formative moment was during, I think it was the day before the inauguration, and I was in.
Okay, let me stop here. Let me go back to what I said about the issues of not having consistency. Voting doesn't matter in a voluntary society. There's no voting. As when you're not ANCAP, when you're not voluntarist, when you're that form of soft, when you're that soft form of libertarian, when you allow government, you allow that small government, and you vote for it, and then you have voting, then you have the possibility of expanding government, then you have the possibility of people voting for more government, and then if you accept that, you have to start worrying about demographics. You have to start worrying about the different, how the different ethnicities vote, how the genders vote, and then you go down the rabbit hole, right? And you go to, and you start worrying about all those things and speculating about all those things, and get combative, and really engaging in some form of class warfare, because now that matters, because voting matters, because voting is a thing, and that happens, and that transition from libertarianism to that happens because libertarians are not being consistent. Consistent libertarians go full voluntarist. They don't use voting. There's no state, so you don't have to worry. Your association depends on just your own will. You don't need to worry that much how other people think things should be done, because they have no influence on you, because they're not voting to decide your fate. And that's the issue, right? I understand where he's coming from. He was some form of conservatarian, small government libertarian, and then he is but voting is still a thing. So he sees the consequences of voting. He sees how different groups vote, and then he starts talking about it. He starts talking about it. He starts worrying about it, and he starts going for an optimal solution, right? He starts not that not voting is an optimal solution, but he starts going for this second tier solutions, I guess, to prevent people from coming because they vote the way I don't like, and this kind of thing. And those are all effects of not being consistent in the first place, in my opinion. Okay.
Boston University at the time, and there was this big protest happening in the Boston Commons, and Antifa was there. There were maybe like 50 Antifa members there. And I looked at them sort of like pillaging and running through the streets and vandalizing and very violent. And I thought to myself, this kind of thing just shouldn't be allowed. In that moment, it sort of became very clear to me that the story of the world is the forces not between like liberty and tyranny, but between order and disorder. And I said, well, we maybe just need the government to round these people up and put them in jail. And it doesn't even really matter, well, have they violated the NAP property rights? These people are.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute. You see what he's doing? How Antifa, as bad as they are, breaking things, are not a violation of private property. If that in a voluntary society, every occupied space has a proprietary, right? It is private property. So if they are breaking something and that's not theirs, that's a crime. That's a violation of private property. So how would you think that's a issue with libertarianism, with AnCaps for that matter? It's not. If that's your property and some Antifa or any other person comes to break it, you have a right to defend yourself. You have a right to defend your property. You have a right to use force. Why do you need the state for that? Why the state's the only institution which can guarantee that order he's talking about? I like order as well, And I think order is guaranteed by respect of private property and by extension by respecting the non-aggression principle. So he's making some logical jumps there because he's not coming from a consistent form of libertarianism, because the small government was not guaranteeing the order he's talking about. And by the way, we don't live under a small government. Here in Brazil, we don't live under small government. You and the people in the U.S. or any other country do not live under small government. There's no such thing as small government, right?
Are subverting order. And a lot of these left-wing type people, communists, Bolsheviks, whatever, I don't think you can ever convince them to come to our side, particularly women, who I think are less than rational, if they take on these hardcore.
Okay, here's some of those harsh comments by him that he's famous for. I really don't see the point. Maybe I see the point if he's talking about politics, he's talking about voting, and then he has to worry about how women vote. But then again, it's a problem of inconsistency. All those worries comes from inconsistency.
Or SJW type views, I don't think you'll ever have this like free and fair discussion where they come to our side and they agree with us. But so long as they're out there, maybe agitating or whatever, they're going to be subverting and destroying traditional order, and that is going to destroy the society eventually. So I took a very like counter Enlightenment sort of perspective at that point. I didn't know it at the time, but that's really what it was. And I said it's about order and it's about demographics, and this liberty stuff is sort of secondary.
I certainly look. I agree.
Okay, how are those incompatible? How are liberty and order incompatible? Liberty is what remains from the respect of private property. If you have freedom to do what you want, what you desire with your property and respecting other people's property, that brings about order, because you have to reach agreements, you have to respect contracts, and he's not seeing that. I don't think he ever saw that. It's a similar case with Trudilton. I know you're familiar with him. He was some sort of libertarian, and he went that route as well. I think he's friends with Nick, and I don't know. Last time I saw Trudilton was just shouting some hot takes on Twitter about anything because he's trying to sound edgy, I guess. But he was a libertarian, but he never got it right, and then that happens because you don't have consistency.
Agree with you on this, and I recently spoke with the chairman of the Libertarian Party on my show, and I was one of the things I was talking to him about was this. You know, he was going off on the evils of racism, and I was like, well, what about all the anti-white racism that we see everywhere that just dominates culture? And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen any anti-white race, and which was, you know, and I ended up just like pulling up quotes and being like, imagine this was black instead of white. I mean, come on, you would be calling this racist. And I do think, given that as a libertarian, I think it's something like over 90% of libertarians in America are white, and the white people are the only demographic that a majority, although a very slim majority, prefers smaller government to bigger government. It doesn't really seem to make a lot of strategic sense to me to go along with bashing white people. I mean, I could understand strategically saying I want to bring other people on board, but to just like, if you have one group that kind of agrees with you and you're like, man, that group really sucks, that just seems like bad strategy. So I agree with that. In terms of what you're saying about other...
Okay, let me answer you. Oh, that happened October. The video description says October 15, but that's just an extract from the original conversation. So I don't really know when the original happened, but it was recent on Part of the Problem podcast by Dave Smith. Okay, so that what he talked about was something I said earlier, that kind of stands from the Libertarian Party, right? They are really degenerating the idea of libertarianism. They're causing that kind of backlash. How can you not recognize that there's this kind of of racial hostility in the U.S., in the Western world as a whole, and don't do that, don't see that, I suppose, just for virtue signaling, right? You're just trying to pander to a broader audience, but then you lose your base. You lose the only guys who vote for you, which are not many to begin with. And that's the kind of thing that makes people frustrated. I don't think the Libertarian Party can deserves any respect up to this point. They deserve it on the times of Ron Paul, but not now. And that's something that that Dave Smith's pointing, and many paleocons agree. That's not the right approach. You have to stand for principles. You have to stand for the right things, and not and not for votes. Politicization always destroy things. Politicization just corrupts things, just degenerate things, and cause this kind of effects. There's no political solution, and with that, I'm not calling for violence, not at all. I'm calling for organic institutions. I'm calling for people solving local problems and forgetting about these national solutions. But many people don't. Most of people don't even think about it.
Other voting groups, I absolutely agree with you that is a big problem. It's probably the biggest problem with the demographic changes, as far as I'm concerned, is that, like, the way that they vote. But again, I'm just saying, I think the essence of the problem there is that they're voting for bigger government. And to say we're going to take over the government in order to squash those people, I mean, maybe seems like a dangerous game. Seems like a game that you're probably not going to win, given that.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know if I gave that impression in the beginning when I talk about the consequences of not having consistent stances and going for demographics or other issues. I'm not saying that those are not important. That matters. That's true. Demographics has the effects of demographics are real, but they don't matter that much when you have a fully voluntary society. And that's the issue that Dave's pointing. The demographics doesn't matter if you don't have big government or even small government, for that matter. And most of those new right people, paleocon people, are looking to the wrong solution, are looking to the wrong problem to begin with.
That the demographics are not in your favor.
Yeah, that's true, and that's really the essence of the struggle right now, is that the Democrats are obviously importing the voters, Republicans too, and I'm sure you know this, for cheap labor and everything. But it even goes beyond that. I mean, it's not simply that the people that have come into the country are supporting big government. Honestly, even if they were coming in and supporting smaller government, I still wouldn't want them here, because initially that's how it started out for me, the transformation from libertarian to paleoconservative, as I said.
Okay, you don't want it, but do you have a right to prevent them from coming? And I'm not talking about open borders here. I'm against open borders, because the only legitimate borders are private borders. And then you're not allowed to cross the borders of my property if I don't want you to. But you can't prevent other people from receiving people from abroad on their property. So if you have an issue with foreign people, don't allow them in your property, but you can control what other people are doing, as long as they are not performing aggression against you.
Well, they're going to come here and they're going to vote to abolish the Second Amendment and put in hate speech laws and expand the state. Because I was looking at all this, like Pew.
And again, that's a problem, because you're basing your rights on government. You're basing your rights on the Constitution, and that's not the way to go. There's something called natural rights that exist despite what is written on a piece of paper. And then you can't abolish that. You can just not recognize it. And you have to defend it. Government won't save you. It has never saved anyone. On the long term, at least.
Research data, and maybe you're familiar with this as well. Like you said, they don't support small government. Minorities, or it's not really fair to call minorities or non-whites, but they also don't support gun rights. They also don't support free speech. They don't support an originalist interpretation of the Constitution. It's only white people who support these things. And so initially, that was my concern. I was like a Ted Cruz constitutionalist conservative, but I said, look, I mean, these people are going to change the landscape forever. At least at a transitional level, we have to mind the demographics. Maybe we need to assimilate these people. Maybe eventually we could take more people, but at least for now, we want to have small government. Non-whites voting in large numbers is not really going to get us there. And gradually it starts, maybe the problem is not that non-whites are our ultimate end, which is small government, but maybe them being here in large numbers and making white people a minority in this land is perhaps not something that's the best in itself. Maybe that's causing problems in itself. And so then, I totally redirected my perspective from, just like consequentially in favor of government, from like a consequentialist perspective to, maybe just by virtue of itself, demographic changes are bringing bad things. So, I would agree that maybe the ultimate end was small government, like using big government to prevent. I mean, do you see where that would probably be contradictory? But I think now at this point, I would say that just demographic change in itself has a host of problems, and maybe them voting for like some kind of authoritarian managerial state is just one among many consequences. I think if we had a tyranny in America.
Okay, if I understood correctly, because as the sound was really crappy at that point, he was basically trying to change things from the inside, right? Government brought about all those issues, the migration issues and whatever, but I'll start supporting government to change the course of it, to reverse it. Okay, good luck with that. You're right, Tony. Are you AnCap? I follow you. As you can see, he was trying to change things from the inside, but as Dave pointed out, that's a losing game, right? Because you already recognize that demographics is changing to favor bigger government. So how can you how can you get to the power if not by violent means? I guess. How can you get to power by in a democratic way? You always lose, and you keep legitimizing the democratic way and keep losing, and government you keep increasing. Oh, that's a losing game. As Michael Mellis says, this tension between many groups, minorities and majorities, will end up escalating, and we will end up with succession. That many people are talking more seriously about succession now, I guess, in the United States, here in Brazil as well, in some regions, because people had enough. There's no political solution. We can't change it. We put our faith on some new guy who is saying the truth and whatever, and when he gets there, even if he wants to do something, he can't, because everything's rigged. The system's rigged. There's too much inertia to move. A single person, a few well-intentioned people can't change it. So why putting your faith on that kind of solution? Go for local communities, build something, succeed. You don't need to have an official succession document. Succeeding in practice. Grow your own food, use solar energy, build a thorium nuclear reactor. I don't know if that's possible, but solve problems locally. Technology is advancing. Look for it. Look for solutions. Stop playing the politics game. Stockpile guns and as much as you can. Do something. That's the only reasonable solution. It's not perfect. It's not quick and easy, it will never be perfect. You always have to struggle, but it's the only realistic thing. Stop trying to go for politics. It's all rigged. Politics just bring together all the bad, the worst people. Always can't you can't do much about it. Okay.
America, I mean, it would be bad. Don't get me wrong, but maybe it would resemble a banana republic in Latin American countries. Maybe it would resemble maybe what's happening in China. And I'm not saying that like again to minimize what's happening there, but again, I think if you look between an authoritarian period in our time and our entire people getting snuffed out, and the world basically descending into primitivism, barbarism, never to return. I think clearly one fate for our people to have a sort of collective consciousness about humanity or about our race, one outcome is obviously worse than the other. Because, like, again, we talk about demographic change. I don't think the world ever recovers from that. I think, and I don't know if you're comfortable with this, but once you get into average IQ, once you get into the idea of some people and some civilizations are more exceptional than others, it's really not ambiguous that the demographic change that's happening on a global scale in the next 100 years is going to all.
He went full with Stefan Molyneux on that one, right? And by the way, I like Stefan's content, but he puts too much emphasis on this IQ thing. I'm not saying it's false. I guess there's some truth to it, but he sometimes I think he forgets about the voluntary thing, the AnCap thing. But I don't know what he's trying to do. So
But eliminate a future for mankind, I think, in the stars or even having written language or anything like that. I think skyscrapers are coming down, they're never going to be built again. Cathedrals, art, the whole nine yards, it's all going away. And, maybe these are two competing alarmist visions of Stalinism versus, the fear of a black planet or something like that. But, I think one outcome, there's been authoritarianism before, bad, we've always survived it, or in most cases. The demographic change, I think, would be a million years of darkness if that happened.
Well, okay, so
I'm under the impression that Nick wants to live in a white Cuba to prevent migration, right? Why not just live in a voluntary society? Why not just evade taxes and do whatever you want to boycott government? Why this? Why rooting for national socialism? Right? There's no point.
okay, so we're fellow travelers to a point, but I'll get off the bus at the decentralization part. Well, I would say, just because it reminds me that Paul Gottfried always said, and he would speak at like the Mises Institute and these other kind of like anarcho-capitalists, and he would say, look, I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, I'm a traditionalist, paleocon conservative, but I recognize that our only path forward is to smash the managerial state. It's the only shot that we have. So to that end, I do think that we are fellow travelers. However, I'm not necessarily opposed to power. I'm not necessarily opposed to elites. I don't know, Tucker Carlson said this once. I thought it was a great quote where he said, I'm not against elites. I just believe in impressive elites. Like, I believe our elites should be somewhat impressive. You look at, like, I was playing on my last podcast clips from Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff, who's Chuck Schumer is, of course, the top Democrat in the Senate, and Adam Schiff is the head of the House Intelligence Community. I mean, if nothing else, these people just aren't impressive. Like, I've met so many more impressive people in my life. In the stand-up comedy scene, I've met more impressive people than these guys are, and yet these are the elites. So part of what...
Yeah, that's something that many people who are against anarchism, against anarcho-capitalism don't understand. We're not libertine. We're not advocating for do whatever you want. We're advocating for property rights, non-aggression, and the order that brings about. As he said, we believe we're not left-wing anarchists who believes everyone is basically equal, and without coercion, everyone will be equalized. That's not the case. I do not believe in that. People are different. People have different capacities. People have different abilities, and that will make that will end up in some that will end up bringing about some hierarchies, right? There will be institutions, there will be professionals, there will be elites on many different fields, hierarchies of competence, as Jordan Peterson says. And that's order. That's order. That's natural order. That's organic order. I believe in that. You don't need a managerial state to do that. If, how can you believe that some types of people who are same as other people will have the ability to manage the entire society? Like, we can't manage our lives, but the politicians can manage the lives of everyone. That makes no sense at all. The only thing that you get the only way that you get a optimal but not perfect solution is to let the interactions, the voluntary interactions, bring about the natural elites, as Hans Hoppe would say. I want order. I want natural order, the most stable kind of order. In that sense, you can say that libertarians are the true conservatives, and anarchists, right-wing anarchists, are the true types of conservatives.
What I absolutely think that, as you alluded to earlier, I absolutely think that wealthy people in a free market will wield a lot of power. I mean, money is power. So absolutely. I just think impressive people who help society in general are going to be the ones, who rise up. And I think this is true, generally speaking, in a market economy. However, to what you were saying about time preference, look, you made the point that, say we were to raise interest rates tomorrow, I don't think all of a sudden people are going to stop listening to Lil Wayne and start listening to Mozart. By the way, I just showed my age. This is the problem with talking with somebody in their 20s. Lil Wayne was the best I could do as like what's going on right now. What's the like crazy like degenerate music of the day? I know I'm like 15 years late to the party. There's probably somebody I'm not aware of, but whoever's rapping about strippers dancing on a pole right now, that guy, that's who I'm talking about. So no, I don't think that would happen tomorrow, but that is not what the point is. The question that I think is more interesting to get at the heart of this is, had we never embarked on this system to begin with, would we have stopped producing Mozart? Would we have stopped that culture? Like, what is it that took us from there to here? I mean, if your goal is to deal with where we are now, that's a worthwhile question. And what I do believe is, if there had never been a creation of a central bank, if the government hadn't taken over public schooling in the way that they had, if you hadn't had this, like, look, whether it's, you talked about before the CIA being involved in postmodern art, the CIA being involved in the drug trade. I mean, the all of the stuff that you remove all of that, the incentivizing of families to break up, all of the crazy things that the state has done. What if none of that had happened? I don't think it would have slowed down technological innovation at all. In fact, it probably would have sped it up. But I don't think that we would have lost all of those cultural values that we have. So I do believe it's not crazy to go, oh, it's just the central banking and the time preference, and this is why people don't believe in God anymore the way they used to. The point is that there was a massive re-engineering of society that was all done by big government. And I do think, I think it's undeniable that something changed, right? And I think that is the most reasonable thing to peg it on. So, I mean, obviously something changed. If you look at, television or movies or commercials in the 50s, and it's all like some, kid like running up like, gee, Pa, let me help you with the yard work. And you look at like, commercials today, and it's like someone in a thong shaking their ass. Like, something changed. It's like, obviously, human nature, it may not be as malleable as the leftist socialists think it is, but it's certainly somewhat malleable because it went from that to this. And by the way, that's not as simple as demographics. It's a lot of white people who are caught up in this thing as well. So I do think what's reasonable to assume is that, yeah, people have been propagandized and and altered in some way. So I don't know if we could get back to that tomorrow, but I at least recognize what caused this rift to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I sort of understand what you mean. I just think, whether we could change it by, going back to high interest rates tomorrow, or whether that was just the ultimate genesis of the transformation. I just think it's a economically sort of reductive argument that the most reasonable thing we could peg time preference changing on is like interest rates. I mean, interest rates are important. And you're saying it's not just the interest rates; it's government schooling, and it's the CIA, and it's everything that you get with big government. I understand that. I just think that maybe the government changes are reflective of deeper currents that are happening, is all. I just think that looking at the government changes and the consolidation of power, maybe I'm just sort of fatalistic about these things.
But what are those deeper changes? I don't mean to cut you off, but what do you think the deeper changes are? Because they certainly started before the demographic changes started. I mean, the 60s, the 60s was the 60s. The 1965 Immigration Act didn't result in 1968. So, like, I would say, no, I think the deeper change is the destruction of the family. I think that's the real problem that's going on. But I'm curious, what do you think the deeper change is?
Yeah, I wasn't trying to allude to demographic change because you're right. I think the demographic change itself is reflective of the same things we're talking about. I would say that, something like the destruction of the family, I think ultimately it has to do with the decline of religion. And that's really why, I identify as a paleoconservative or a traditionalist. It really is just counter to the Enlightenment. People say, well,
okay. Let me just say something. I think both of them said something important here. They've talked about all the economic incentives, right? All the changes of central banking and the war on poverty. Those economic incentives that made society change. But as he points out, and Nick points out, that's not the entire thing. You have some cultural changes, and as Nick admits, that cultural change precedes the government changes and precede the demographic changes. So if you get it, why you're not addressing the cultural thing? Why you're going for the demographic changes? The demographic changes are a consequence of political changes, and political changes are a consequence of cultural changes. So why you're going for the second effect on the chain? Why not going for culture and seeking for a more permanent solution? Go for culture, right? Why you're just trying to fix the consequences and not the root cause? Be it religion or not, you can investigate that. I think he's partially true. He's partially right on that. But why you're not addressing that? Why you're going for the after effects?
Conservatism is about conserving the founding fathers. I see the founding fathers as liberals. I see the founding fathers as revolutionaries. Deep down, I'm basically a reactionary. I would say
okay, he's right on that one. I don't know much about the history of the U.S., but as far as I know, the founding fathers were classical liberals, right? They were opposing, in some sort, the traditional medieval world, and some of them were pretty lefty. If you look at Thomas Jefferson, he believed on this equality between men, this equality in capacity. As far as I know, Tom Woods talks a lot about it. Michael Malice as well. So and they didn't even bring some big changes regarding government. If you look at the situation of the settlers on in this 18th century in 1776, they were paying a 3% tax on tea, right? That's what motivated the Tea Party. And soon after the revolution, soon after independence, they were paying more of that in taxes. So the comparing to their time, the founding fathers weren't that much of minarchies, right? They weren't trying to reduce the size of government that much compared to what King James or whoever was in charge in England was doing. So that's not really the mindset to have, but we regard the founding fathers as this those projectors of the smallest state possible, right? But that didn't end up well. And he's right on that one. But why his solution is to do more of what they did?
The further that we get away from the idea of hardcore religion in the society, hardcore idea of order and tradition, I think that's when you get, the secular state. That's when you get all these things. So I would say that, yeah, that would be the deeper trend.
But what do you think? What do you think got us away from religion? By the way, just so you know, I mean, I used to be like a kind of militant atheist earlier in my life, and I've completely turned around on that. Like, I really do think there's tremendous value in religion, in traditionalism. I mean, look, I am somebody who, I used to not believe in God, and I do believe in God now. I'm not a particularly religious person in the sense, like, I don't go to temple, I don't go to church, I'm not like a part of an organized religion. But I noticed over time that many of the best human beings I've ever met were like devout Christians. And that just kind of kept, like that kept popping up over and over to a point. And then after having a child, it really changed the way that I look at the world and the meaning of life and things like that. So I'm not opposed to that. But what I'm asking you is what, and to me, in a lot of ways, family and God are almost inseparable. Like, my family is in many ways my God. And I think there's a reason why I found God when I had a child. I really think they're very interconnected. But what do you think led to people breaking that up? I mean, that's a pretty big deal. People were very devoutly religious for thousands of years. And then pretty much all of a sudden, it seems like in the 60s, I guess, it all kind of broke down, and we're living in the aftermath of that. Do you have any guess as to like what led to that?
Well,
What Dave said has something to do with a thing I was discussing earlier. Every time a person lacks purpose in life, and can't find some purpose, some direction, some meaning in life, this person starts seeking for chaos, right? I can't get meaning, so I want chaos now. That happens a lot in our modern world, in my opinion. People can't find meaning, and then they start rooting for chaos. They start venerating chaos, and that's something important. Religion is something that can provide meaning to someone, but I think that also that the search for meaning can lead some person to a more religious understanding of life. Family can be a good can be an important thing as well. As long as you have something to take care of, you have meaning in your life. And when you start abandoning those things, when you start abandoning family and by extension community, and this notion of this transcendent notion of a community that goes over time, you start feeling comfortable with chaos. You start allowing chaos to invade society, and that's what the ones who seek for more power want. Because when there's too much chaos, the only way to put it under control, apparently, is the heavy hand of the state, and then people start giving more ground to the state. So that's something important. That's a cultural aspect that people need to consider. That's why I talk about localism. I talk about solving the problem you can solve locally, because then you can, by your own initiative, by the initiative of your family, the initiative of your local community, you can solve problems and start bringing order to the world again.
Well, it's a very complicated question,
Sure.
obviously, but I would say that it probably had something to do with the printing press. I've read a lot of this. I've read a lot about this subject. Marshall McLuhan had a pretty interesting perspective about this. He wrote about how the printing press and a lot of these technologies that came around in the Middle Ages created the idea of individual, the private self, and this is what created Protestantism ultimately. Protestantism, product of individualism as a product of the idea of the private self-contained individual, away from the family, away from the greater society. So I would say that these things go way, way back. And really, it's a question of, like a really solid metaphysics and philosophy. I forget who said this. I quote.
I mean, let me say that I am Roman Catholic, as Nick, I guess, because he went full Catholic on that one, talking about the evils of the Protestant printing press. But I do not agree with him at all. When you look at history things, the notion of the individual it's a grassroots Christian notion. How can you believe that? That's the great innovation of Christianity, as far as I know, right? One of them, the notion of the personal salvation. You don't have you don't treat people as a collective mass. A personal and universal salvation that depends on yourself. That's a original Christian notion. So how can you say that that's a Protestant innovation? Like I said, he's looking at the wrong issues. He was making that up. Oh, the problem is that we're not traditional enough. No, the most traditional thing is to understand people as we see them. We see that people as independent individuals. Stop fooling your own eyes. Stop denying what your eyes can see. You see people capable of acting. Respect them as such. But then he goes all those things. I mean, I cannot see how Protestantism brought about more individualism, right? They brought more secularism, I guess, because you started having religious wars up to the point that people started saying, okay, let's find some common ground because we can't keep killing each other forever. And then he started humanism or secularism, those kinds of things, because you have to solve the problem, I guess. But that's not an issue. It's not something that has to do with the printing press. Printing press was important to spread knowledge, to spread ideas. I know many of those ideas were harmful to the West. Many revolutionary ideas, but that's a collateral effect. You have to cope with that. This world is not perfect. You solve one problem, you bring about another. Okay, but that was also important to spread good ideas. You can't talk bad about the printing press and then use the internet, which is a modern form of that, to spread your traditional ideas. That's something that helps you. There's some cognitive dissonance going on. Or you really believe that we have to destroy the machines or something like it, like a modern ludist, and go back to the medieval ways? And by the way, I like studying the medieval ages. I think that there's a lot of unfair views of the medieval ages, the Middle Ages, but we have to recognize the good things of modernity as well and try to find some form of synthesis.
Quoted this I was on Paul Gottfried's podcast actually this weekend, and I used this quote and even bothered to look it up because I forgot who said it even on that show. But somebody said that the only ideologies that exist now are Thomism and Marxism. Liberalism has been completely discredited. He said the only person that could bring back liberalism is a great thinker, and the only great thinker in our time is Hegel. I'm butchering it, but it's something to that effect. And so I think that in the absence of Catholicism, I think that you really do have a total degeneration of society. In the absence of a solid metaphysics to serve as the foundation, I think it all falls apart. I was going to say something else, but I just lost my train of thought. So, well,
Nick Fuentes is high, everybody.
Okay. Look something. Even if I concede everything he's saying, and up to some point, I agree with him that the need for a metaphysical ground for your understanding of reality is important. It's really important. Even if I concede all those things he's saying, so some of them are controversial, but even if I concede them, what does the state has to do with it? What has the state to do with it? You don't need a state for that. You don't need the state to spread those ideas. So why vote for Daddy Trump? Why putting your faith on a man? Be it Trump or any other guy. What has the state to do with it? Spread the ideas, change the culture, fight the cultural wars, solve things locally. What the state has to do with it? That's the great issue. It's like you depend on them for moralizing society, and when that worked, Never. Every time the state wants to moralize people, every time the state wants to make people follow the spirit of time, like mentioning Hegel there, as he talked about that went nuts. So I don't get it at all.
He's losing his train of thought.
Yeah. But I read de Maistre also, or de Maistre, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it, it's French, but he wrote about how the only constitution that we can have that makes sense is one that is based on the divine right of kings. Anytime you get a constitution that's based on rationalism, something like this, mutually agreed principles, consensus, can be questioned, and people can be skeptical of it until it's destroyed. And so I think that's a pretty good, that's analogous to how I view society. In the absence of this kind of totally devout belief in God with an authority on earth, that says that this is the final, the ultimate answer on life or death issues, I think the ultimate trend, the ultimate momentum is towards materialism, towards individualism, it's towards people being totally hedonistic about pleasure. It took a very long time. It's like they say about the Soviet Union, the collapse happened very slowly and then very suddenly. But I think that's ultimately where it came
But I
That's another issue. Saying that from the moment you value individualism, for the moment that you value the individual, you end up with hedonism. You end up with people being selfish and trying to satisfy their desires as much as possible. Look, for you to be moral, for you to do the right thing, for you to do the virtuous thing, as Aristotle already said, like more than 2,000 years ago, you have to be free. You have to have property of your own body, of the means to do something. To be virtuous, you have to be free. You have to be treated as an individual, to do the right thing. So what is that? You're trying to negate individualism, the individual, to prevent they do hedonistic things, to prevent they do things that harm himself. But then you're not allowing the person to be good as well. You're not allowing it to be moral. So that's another contradiction. But let's go to the end. I don't know how long that. That's fairly long.
I agree. Well, listen,
Time.
obviously I disagree with the stuff on China, and I don't think that Donald Trump's done anything that's been remotely close to great deal making in any of these instances. I would say though, I think that overall I thought that the not as good as I'd like it to be, but the corporate tax cuts I thought were a good move. I think he's done some really good deregulation in like the energy sector, particularly, and some other areas. But just so, I mean, for something that was supposed to be such a shake-up election, such nothing. I mean, it's like a minute, like it's really something that if somebody had ran on a like, we're going to take small incremental steps to move in the right direction, you could kind of say, okay, he's done what he said. But this was a guy who was supposed to shake up everything, and it makes you wonder. Here's the AnCap in me coming out. How viable is a political solution to this at all? Because it does seem like I mean, look, this is if this is what you do, if you go from Barack Obama to Donald Trump, about as big a contrast as you could imagine, and you get like incremental change and all of the problems that you have, all of the trajectories that we're on, that the problems I have as well, we're still going right on there. I mean, the things that we agree in common, the managerial state ain't being crushed anytime soon. The wars aren't ending anytime soon. The issue with, I think border crossings have been up under Donald Trump. I might be wrong about that, but I think they've been like extremely high the last year and a half. So anyway, I don't know. I guess you kind of answered the question already, but it does seem to me like if your big problem is demographic changes, kind of seems like you're screwed. I mean, the demographics are changing. Whites are going to be a minority in America. There's no going back from that.
Yeah, well, and you hit the nail on the head that this was supposed to be a political realignment. This is supposed to be this like political earthquake, that he was supposed to be so different, and it was this revolutionary thing, and at least that's what everybody thought. On our side, we thought that was going to be true, but in a good way. And on the left, they thought it was going to be this, but in a bad way. But he's just I don't think we would have gotten anything different under Mitt Romney or under John McCain. We achieved the Heritage Foundation agenda or whatever. We achieved the American Enterprise Institute agenda, like you said, incremental deregulation, corporate tax cut. Would any of the other 16 people that ran in the Republican primary, would they have done anything differently so far? No. And I totally agree with the idea that says a lot. It says a lot about the efficacy of a political solution. If Donald Trump could be so rapidly assimilated into the status quo to go from, the things he was saying in 2016, what did he say? I think in the South Carolina debate, he looked at Jeb Bush and said, the World Trade Center came down under your brother, and they lied about Iraq. They knew there were no weapons of mass destruction.
He said,
and they went in anyway.
How about this one? He goes, they asked him about ISIS, and he goes, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton created ISIS. And I go, well, you don't mean they created ISIS. He goes, they created ISIS. He was going hardcore for a while there. And so absolutely, it seems like somewhat hopeless on that. All right, listen, we're up against the end of time, so I want to ask you, let's run this down.
Okay, that last part doesn't matter, but you can see even Nick recognizes it. They've nailed it. They've nailed it. He said we believed in all this change with Trump saying all the right things, saying all the true things, as I said in the beginning. And there was all this hope, and a lot of libertarians abandoned it to support Trump because they think that's the time, that's the change it's coming, and not much changed. All the promises that you got just a tiny part of it, right? So who's silly now? I don't want to be a jerk, but who's silly now? There's all those people saying, "Oh, silly libertarian, you don't understand politics, you don't understand demographics, you have to support Trump and whatever." And now, what did it solve? Nothing, not much, at least. And who's silly now? Can we go back and recognize there's no political solution? Every time someone goes there, the deep state will end up engulfing the people, will end up locking people up, or the guy will just sell himself. There's people now putting faith on Tulsi Gabbard. I like Tulsi. I think she's saying a lot of important things regarding foreign policy. But do you really believe she'll be able to change something? The system is too big. We have to solve things that we are able to solve in small scale. So even Nick recognized that. That's the problem. He said all those things about how he transitioned from a libertarian, a conservatarian, to paleocon, to a traditionalist, because he saw all the political movements going around Donald Trump and all the things that he's saying, and all that, all that backflip didn't work. So what now? We will just double down and keep calling libertarians silly, and keep doubling down on paleoconservatism and more national socialism and all those kinds of things? Or can we just recognize that it was just an illusion and go back to the things that matter? I don't want to speak ill of Nick or any of those people, as long as they don't be jerks, as long as they're not jerks. But what now? True Juton is the same. He has all that cognitive dissonance. Both True Juton and Nick, you can see that those are very intelligent guys, very well read guys. They are sharp and all that, but they have this cognitive dissonance when they say, "Oh, silly libertarians, you don't understand society, you don't understand that norms come from social agreement and all that." And at the same time, they are a fringe political movement. They are a minority, a minority, and they are relying on that minority to bring about the change that they even they think that will just happen when you have a majority supporting it. So, you know, we have more than 1 hour of live now. Let me just say again, sorry for my English. I want to say some complex things, but I'm still not able to articulate well. But I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. And I'm thankful that Dave had this interview with Nick to elucidate more what's the problem. And after all this controversy with Charlie Kirk, which doesn't seem like a nice guy at all, seems like a how you call that, a Ben Shapiro kind of conservative, right? A pundit, a Ben Shapiro kind of conservative pundit, just to be a controlled opposition. So I don't like the guy, and I don't think it was fair for him to block the presence of Nick Fuentes in Politicom. But at the same time, that doesn't mean I agree with the solutions that Nick is proposing, because they miss the point. So I guess that's it for now. I'll post some links in description with more well thought people developing that discussion, because some links that I find useful. And look for Exagod response to Vincent as well. I think it was really nice, and I think that's it. I have nothing more to say, and just remember that culture is organic, and for being organic, something has to be free, have to emerge from free association. That's just it for now. So thanks for listening, and till next time. Thanks for listening, and until next time. I have to improve my pronunciation. Sorry. I hope to improve it over time. Bye for now.